I never imagined that 3 words could destroy a lifetime of love until my daughter Sophia looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're trailer trash," right before hanging up on me during the worst crisis of my life. The silence that followed wasn't just the end of our phone call. It was the sound of my heart breaking and my illusions about family crumbling into dust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Martinez, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew exactly who I was in my daughter's life. I was the mother who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities I never had. I was the woman who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her private school education, who had sold my grandmother's jewelry to fund her college tuition, who had moved heaven and earth to make sure she never wanted for anything. But on that cold February morning, when the bank called to tell me they were foreclosing on my small trailer home, I discovered I was nothing more than an embarrassment to the successful women I had raised. The irony wasn't lost on me that the call came while I was sitting in the very trailer Sophia had grown up calling home. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. A 1987 single-wide mobile home in Sunset Valley Trailer Park, with faded blue skirting and a small wooden deck I had built myself with YouTube tutorials and sheer determination. But inside those modest walls, I had created a sanctuary of love and dreams. The kitchen table where Sophia had done her homework every night. The living room where we had watched movies together, sharing popcorn and planning her bright future. The bedroom that had been hers alone, decorated with the awards and certificates she had earned through her academic excellence. When the foreclosure notice came, my world tilted sideways. The medical bills from my recent cancer treatment had drained every penny I had saved over 30 years of working as a hotel housekeeper. The treatments had been successful. I was declared cancer-free just 3 months earlier, but the financial devastation was complete. My insurance had covered some costs, but the deductibles, the experimental treatments not covered by my plan, and the months I couldn't work had created a mountain of debt I couldn't climb. I sat at that familiar kitchen table, holding the official papers with trembling hands, and did the only thing I could think to do. I called my daughter. Sophia lived in Manhattan now, working as a corporate lawyer for one of those prestigious firms with names that sounded like old money and power. She had a corner office on the 42nd floor, a penthouse apartment in Soho, and a lifestyle that seemed like something from a magazine. I rarely called her at work knowing how busy and important she was, but this felt like an emergency that required her attention. Her assistant answered with that crisp, professional tone that made me feel small before I even spoke. After what felt like an eternity on hold, listening to classical music that reminded me how far removed I was from Sophia's world, her familiar voice came on the line. But it wasn't warm or welcoming. It was impatient, distracted, already annoyed before I had said a word. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a very important meeting. Can this wait?" she said, without even a hello. I could hear voices in the background, the rustle of papers, the sound of a world that moved too fast for sentiment or family emergencies. "Sophia, honey, I'm sorry to bother you, but something terrible has happened. The bank is foreclosing on the trailer. They're giving me 30 days to pay $18,000, or they're taking the only home I've ever owned." My voice cracked as I said it, the reality of losing everything hitting me fresh with each word. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her sigh, the kind of exasperated sound she used to make as a teenager when I didn't understand her homework or couldn't afford the designer clothes her friends wore. "Mom, honestly, this isn't really a surprise. You've been living paycheck to paycheck your entire life. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling you it's time to make some adult decisions about your living situation." The coldness in her voice stunned me. This wasn't the daughter who used to curl up next to me on the couch when she was scared during thunderstorms. This wasn't the girl who had cried when she left for college because she would miss our morning conversations over coffee. This was a stranger who sounded embarrassed by my existence. Sophia, I raised you in this home. This is where you learned to read, where you practiced your violin, where we celebrated every birthday and holiday. This isn't just a living situation, this is our family history." I tried to keep my voice steady, but desperation was seeping through every word. "Family history?" Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "Mom, it's a trailer. A rundown mobile home in the worst part of town. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to bring friends home to that place? Do you know what it was like to lie about where I lived when people asked?" Each word hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the times she had brought friends over, all the sleepovers I had hosted, all the birthday parties I had thrown with homemade decorations and carefully budgeted treats. I thought those were happy memories. I had been wrong about everything. "Honey, I know it's not fancy, but it's clean and comfortable, and it's ours. I worked so hard to make it a real home for us." My voice was barely above a whisper now, the fight going out of me with each cruel revelation. A real home? Her voice rose and I could hear her moving, probably walking away from her colleagues so they wouldn't overhear her family drama. "Mom, successful people don't live in trailer parks. My colleagues live in Tribeca lofts and Hampton estates. When they ask about my background, do you think I'm going to tell them I grew up in a single-wide mobile home with a mother who cleans hotel rooms?" The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. She was ashamed of me, not just of our circumstances, but of me, personally. Of the life I had built, the work I had done to support us, the sacrifices I had made so she could have opportunities I never dreamed of. "Sophia, everything I did was for you. Every extra shift I worked, every penny I saved, every dream I gave up, it was all so you could have a better life than mine." My voice broke completely now, tears streaming down my face as I sat alone in the kitchen where I had packed her school lunches for 12 years. "And I'm grateful, I really am. But Mom, you have to understand that I can't keep being dragged down by your poor decisions. I've worked incredibly hard to build a reputation in the city, to create a life that reflects who I want to be. I can't have people knowing that I come from this." "From what, Sophia? From a mother who loved you unconditionally?" "From trailer trash, Mom. I can't have people knowing I come from trailer trash."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Me, the woman who had given birth to her, raised her alone, sacrificed everything so she could become the successful, educated woman she was today. I sat there holding the phone long after the dial tone started, unable to process what had just happened. The trailer suddenly felt different around me. The walls I had painted cheerful yellow to make the small space feel brighter now seemed dingy and cheap. The furniture I had carefully chosen from thrift stores and garage sales, pieces I had restored with my own hands, now looked shabby and embarrassing. The family photos covering every surface, pictures of Sophia's graduations, her accomplishments, our vacations to the nearby state park because that's all I could afford, now felt like evidence of a life I should be ashamed of. I walked through the rooms that had been my world for over 3 decades, seeing them through Sophia's eyes for the first time. The bathroom where I had taught her to braid her hair, now just a cramped space with outdated fixtures. The living room where we had watched her favorite movies dozens of times, now just a small area with worn carpeting and hand-me-down furniture. The kitchen where I had taught her to cook my grandmother's recipes, now just a narrow galley with appliances that belonged in a museum. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to grow in my chest. Not just hurt, not just betrayal, but a cold, clear anger that started as a spark and began to spread through my entire being. She had called me trailer trash. The woman who had cleaned toilets and made beds for wealthy hotel guests so her daughter could attend the best schools. The woman who had worked Christmas mornings and missed her own birthday celebrations so there would be money for Sophia's college applications. The woman who had literally given her life savings for cancer treatment so she could survive long enough to see her daughter succeed. Trailer trash.
I walked to my bedroom and opened at the closet that held my most precious possessions. Behind the work uniforms and the few nice outfits I owned for special occasions, there was a small, fireproof box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents that told a very different story about Elena Martinez than the one Sophia had created in her mind. Property deeds, stock certificates, business registration papers, investment account statements. My daughter thought she knew who I was, but she knew nothing about the woman who had raised her. She saw the trailer, the uniform, the calloused hands from years of physical labor, and she thought that was the whole story. She had no idea that every dollar I had ever earned cleaning those hotel rooms had been carefully invested in real estate ventures across 3 states. She didn't know that the poor woman she was ashamed of owned 17 rental properties, 4 commercial buildings, and had a net worth that would make her fancy Manhattan colleagues envious. I had kept it secret for one simple reason. I wanted her to learn the value of hard work and education. I wanted her to build her own success, not rely on family wealth. I had planned to surprise her with the truth when she was more mature, maybe when she got married or had children of her own. I had imagined her shock and joy when she learned that her mother wasn't just a hotel housekeeper, but a successful real estate investor who had been quietly building an empire while scrubbing bathroom tiles and changing bedsheets. The cancer diagnosis had changed my timeline. I had planned to tell her during my treatment, to ease her worries about my medical bills by explaining that I could afford the best care. But she had been so busy with her career, so focused on her own life, that she never asked detailed questions about my finances. She simply assumed that the woman who lived in a trailer park must be struggling, must be poor, must be exactly what she appeared to be on the surface. Now, sitting with those financial documents spread across my kitchen table next to the foreclosure notice, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. If Sophia wanted to pretend she didn't know where she came from, if she was embarrassed by the woman who had sacrificed everything for her success, then perhaps it was time for her to learn exactly what she had thrown away with those 2 cruel words. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had memorized years ago. My financial advisor, Margaret Chen, answered on the second ring with her characteristic efficiency. "Alina, I was wondering when you'd call. I've been watching your portfolio performance, and you're going to be very pleased with this quarter's results." "Margaret, I need to make some changes to my investments. Significant changes. And I need to do it quickly." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" I looked around my trailer one last time at the place where I had raised my daughter to believe that success came from hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. Then I thought about the woman on the other end of that phone call, the woman who had called her own mother trailer trash without a moment's hesitation. I want to buy my daughter's building, and then I want to destroy everything she thinks she knows about success.
It's just unusual to see this level of wealth presented so discreetly. I've never been interested in showing off, Miss Harrison. I prefer to let my actions speak louder than my appearance. I leaned forward slightly, my voice taking on a steelier edge. Now, about the building. I want to purchase it, and I want to close as quickly as possible. Money is no object, and I'm willing to pay above market value if necessary. The building isn't technically on the market, Amanda said, flipping through papers in what I assumed was the property file. But with an offer like this, I'm sure we can convince the current owner to consider selling. May I ask what you plan to do with the property? I smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. I plan to renovate it. Completely transform it, actually. I have some very specific ideas about how to improve the current tenant situation. What Amanda didn't know, what I hadn't told her, was that I had already done extensive research on 1247 Spring Street. I knew that Sophia's law firm, Crawford Mitchell and Associates, occupied the entire 38th through 42nd floors. I knew that her penthouse apartment was actually in the residential section of the same building, floors 43 through 45. I knew that her entire professional and personal life was contained within the walls of the building I was about to purchase. And I knew that as the new owner, I would have the power to make some very interesting changes to her living and working arrangements. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork, financial transfers, and planning sessions with contractors and property managers. I had taken a leave of absence from my job at the hotel, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to focus entirely on my new project. My supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, was surprised by my sudden departure after 30 years of perfect attendance, but she wished me well and told me I'd always have a job waiting if I needed it. If only she knew I could buy the entire hotel chain without breaking a sweat. I moved out of the trailer temporarily, not because of the foreclosure. I had paid that debt the day after my conversation with Sophia, just to prove to myself that I could, but because I wanted to be in New York to oversee the building purchase personally. I rented a modest studio apartment in the village, furnished with the basics, maintaining my appearance as a simple woman of modest means. The closing took place on a Thursday morning, in a conference room that cost more per hour to rent than most people made in a week. I sat at one end of a polished mahogany table, surrounded by lawyers, real estate agents, and financial advisors, all of whom were still adjusting to the reality that I was their client. The previous building owner, a real estate investment company that had owned the property for 15 years, was represented by a team of suits who kept glancing at me curiously. When the final papers were signed and the keys were placed in my hand, I felt a surge of satisfaction unlike anything I had experienced in years. I owned the building where my daughter lived and worked. I controlled her professional environment and her home. She had no idea that the trailer trash mother she was ashamed of now held her entire life in the palm of her hand. But ownership was just the first step. The real plan was about to begin. I spent the next week meeting with architects, contractors, and property management companies, laying out my vision for the building's transformation. To everyone involved, I presented myself as a new property owner interested in maximizing the building's potential and improving the tenant experience. What I didn't mention was that I had one very specific tenant in mind when I made my renovation decisions. The first change was subtle but effective. I hired a new property management company, one with a reputation for being extremely thorough about lease compliance and building regulations. Within days, they had issued notices to several tenants about minor violations that the previous management had overlooked. Crawford Mitchell and Associates received a formal warning about their use of the building's freight elevator for non-authorized purposes, and a reminder that conference calls after 9 p.m. violated the building's noise ordinances. Sophia called me for the first time in 3 weeks after receiving that notice. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way." "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I kept my voice neutral, giving no hint of the satisfaction I felt at hearing stress in her tone. "This is going to sound paranoid, but do you know anything about 1247 Spring Street, the building where I work and live?" "Should I know something about it?" "It's been sold recently, and the new owner has been making all these changes. New management company, stricter building policies, rent increases for some of the commercial tenants. My firm is starting to get concerned about our lease renewal." I allowed a small smile to cross my face. "That does sound stressful. Have you met the new owner?" "No, nobody has. Apparently they're working through property managers and lawyers. Very mysterious. The weird thing is, some of my neighbors in the residential section say they've seen this older Hispanic woman around the building a lot lately, always carrying papers and talking to contractors. She doesn't look like she belongs here, if you know what I mean." "I'm not sure I do know what you mean, Sophia." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. "She dresses like someone who can't afford to live in Soho. But she's always here, always talking to the building staff like she's in charge of something. It's just odd." "Maybe she works for the new owner." "Maybe. It's just making everyone nervous. We've all worked so hard to build our lives here, and now some anonymous buyer is changing everything. I hope whoever it is understands what kind of community they've bought into." "What kind of community is that?"
You know, successful people, professionals, people who've earned the right to live in a place like this through hard work and achievement. Not everyone can afford this lifestyle, and the building has always reflected that exclusivity. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar ache in my chest that came with every reminder of how thoroughly my daughter had rejected everything I represented.
I'm sure the new owner has good reasons for their decisions. I hope so. Anyway, I should go. I'm meeting with the other partners to discuss our options if the building becomes unsuitable for our firm. After she hung up, I sat in my modest studio apartment, looking out at the lights of the city my daughter thought she owned. Tomorrow, phase 2 of my plan would begin, and Sophia was about to discover that success and entitlement weren't the same thing. I had spent days reviewing every lease agreement, every contract, every legal document associated with the building. Crawford Mitchell and Associates had a lease that was set to expire in 8 months, with an option to renew at market rate. Sophia's residential lease was month to month, a premium arrangement that allowed her flexibility but also left her vulnerable to sudden changes. The beauty of my plan wasn't just that I could disrupt her life, it was that I could do it while appearing to be nothing more than a pragmatic property owner making sound business decisions. Every change I implemented would be legally justified and financially logical. The fact that they would make Sophia's life increasingly uncomfortable was simply a coincidence. The next morning, I met with my new property management team to outline the building's immediate future. Martha Gonzalez, the lead manager, was a sharp woman in her 50s who understood that successful property management required attention to detail and consistent enforcement of standards. I want to implement new security protocols, I told her, reviewing the building's current policies. Key card access for all elevators after 7 p.m., visitor registration requirements, and regular inspections of all common areas to ensure compliance with building regulations. That's very thorough, Martha said, making notes. Some tenants might find it restrictive compared to the previous management style. The previous management style is why this building wasn't reaching its full potential, I replied. High-end tenants expect high-end security and services. If somebody's bothered by professional management standards, they're probably not the right fit for a property of this caliber. Within a week, the changes were implemented. Sophia called again, this time more agitated than before. Mom, I can't believe what's happening with this building. They've turned it into Fort Knox. I have to show ID every time I come home after 7 p.m., even though I've lived here for 3 years. Yesterday, they made me register my grocery delivery guy like he was some kind of security threat. That does sound inconvenient, I said, though privately I was pleased that the new protocols were having their intended effect. But maybe they're just trying to improve security. It's not just security, it's everything. They've hired these new cleaning crews that work during the day instead of at night, so there are people with equipment in the hallways when we're trying to work. The elevator maintenance schedule has changed so we can't use the main elevator during peak hours, and they've started charging extra fees for everything. Package acceptance, after-hours building access, and even using the conference room that's supposed to be included in our lease. Each complaint was music to my ears. These weren't arbitrary changes designed to harass tenants. They were standard practices that improved building operations and increased revenue. The fact that they made Sophia's privileged lifestyle less convenient was simply an added benefit. Have you considered looking for a different place? I asked innocently. I can't just move, Mom. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find decent office space in Manhattan? And the residential market is insane right now. Plus, I've built relationships in this building. My neighbors are professionals like me. My doorman knows my preferences. My dry cleaner is across the street. This is my life. I understand. It must be frustrating to feel like your stability is being threatened by someone else's decisions. Exactly. And the worst part is nobody knows who this new owner is. We can't even appeal to them directly or try to work out some kind of arrangement. It's like being controlled by a ghost. A ghost. If only she knew that her ghost was the woman she had dismissed as trailer trash just a month earlier. But I wasn't done yet.
The building changes were just the beginning. I had much bigger plans for Sophia's education about respect, gratitude, and the consequences of cruelty. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in another conference room, this time with the partners of Crawford Mitchell and Associates. As the building's new owner, I had requested a meeting to discuss their lease renewal, which was still 6 months away but required early negotiation for a firm of their size. Richard Crawford, the senior partner, was a distinguished man in his 60s who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. James Mitchell, the other founding partner, was younger but equally polished, with the kind of easy charm that came from generations of family wealth. The third person at the table was my daughter. Sophia had dressed for success in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older and more serious than her 34 years. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded on the table, every inch the successful attorney she had worked so hard to become. She had no idea she was looking at her mother. I had dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing an outfit that walked the line between professional and modest. A navy blue pantsuit from a department store, low heels, minimal jewelry. My hair was styled simply, and I wore glasses I didn't actually need. To anyone in that room, I looked like exactly what I was presenting myself as, a middle-aged businesswoman who had done well for herself but wasn't part of their rarefied social circle. "Mr. Crawford," I said, extending my hand with practiced charm, "thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We're very interested in discussing our continued partnership as tenants in your beautiful building." "The pleasure is mine," I replied, shaking hands with each of them in turn. When I reached Sophia, I looked directly into her eyes, the same dark brown eyes I see in the mirror every morning, and watched as she evaluated me with the casual dismissal she had perfected for people she considered beneath her notice. "This is Sophia Rodriguez, one of our most promising associates," Richard said, and I noticed he used her professional name, the surname she had adopted to sound less ethnic and more acceptable to her upscale clientele. "Ms. Rodriguez," I said, holding her hand just a moment longer than necessary, "I've heard impressive things about your work." "Thank you," she replied with professional courtesy, but I could see in her expression that she had already categorized me as unimportant. Just another landlord to be managed and manipulated if necessary. We spent the next hour discussing lease terms, building improvements, and market rates. I listened to their proposals with apparent interest while internally calculating exactly how much I was going to enjoy destroying their assumptions about leverage and negotiating power.
Martinez, James Mitchell said as we neared the end of the meeting, I hope you understand that Crawford Mitchell and Associates brings significant prestige to this building. We're one of the most respected law firms in the city, and our presence here elevates the property's profile considerably. I do appreciate quality tenants, I agreed, but prestige doesn't pay the bills. I'm primarily interested in tenants who understand that occupying premium space comes with premium responsibilities. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her negotiating instincts engaging. Of course, we're prepared to discuss reasonable increases that reflect current market conditions, but we hope you'll also consider the value we bring beyond just rental payments. Our clients include Fortune 500 companies, entertainment industry leaders, and international business interests. When they visit our offices, they're seeing your building as a reflection of their own success. I smiled at her, an expression that probably looked pleasant but felt sharp around the edges. That's an interesting perspective. Tell me, Miss Rodriguez, what do you think makes someone worthy of occupying a space like this? She didn't hesitate. Success. Achievement. The ability to not just afford the rent, but to contribute to the building's reputation as a place where serious business gets done by serious people. And how do you define serious people? Professionals who've earned their place through education, hard work, and demonstrated excellence in their field. People who understand that reputation and presentation matter in business. I see. And what about people who might not fit that description, but have the financial means to be here? Should money alone determine worthiness? Richard Crawford intervened before Sophia could answer. Miss Martinez, I think what Sophia is expressing is that we value being part of a community of like-minded professionals. It's not about exclusion, it's about shared standards and mutual respect. But I kept my attention focused on my daughter. I'd like to hear Miss Rodriguez's thoughts on this. In your opinion, should someone's background or upbringing affect their right to occupy premium space, assuming they can afford it? Sophia glanced at her colleagues, then back at me. I think context matters. Success isn't just about money, it's about understanding how to operate in sophisticated environments. Someone might have money but lack the cultural background or professional experience to truly belong in a place like this. Cultural background, I repeated slowly. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Well, for example, understanding business etiquette, having the right educational credentials, being comfortable in social situations with other professionals, knowing how to dress, how to speak, how to present yourself in ways that reflect well on the community you're joining. I see. So you believe that someone's value as a tenant should be judged not just on their ability to pay rent, but on whether they meet certain social and cultural standards? To some degree, yes. A building like this is more than just office and residential space. It's a statement about who we are and what we represent. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. My daughter, sitting across from me in a conference room, in a building I owned, was explaining why people like her mother, people she had literally called trailer trash, didn't deserve to share space with superior individuals like herself. That's an interesting perspective, I said finally. I'll definitely take your thoughts into consideration as I make decisions about the building's future. As the meeting concluded, I shook hands with each partner again. When I reached my daughter, I held her gaze for a moment longer than might have been entirely professional. Miss Rodriguez, I have a feeling we'll be seeing quite a bit of each other as I implement my vision for this building. I look forward to working with you, she replied, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention I was paying her. After they left, I sat alone in the conference room, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere in this building, my daughter was returning to her office, probably discussing the meeting with her colleagues, analyzing my words, and trying to determine whether I would be a reasonable landlord or a problematic one. She had no idea that the woman she had dismissed as culturally inferior owned everything she thought made her superior. Her office, her apartment, her carefully curated professional environment, all of it belonged to the trailer trash mother she was too ashamed to acknowledge. But she was about to find out exactly what it felt like to be judged by someone else's standards. And I was going to enjoy every moment of her education. The next phase of my plan required patience and precision. Over the following month, I systematically began implementing changes that would gradually, but effectively dismantle the comfortable world Sophia had built around herself. Each modification was carefully calculated to appear reasonable from a business perspective while creating maximum disruption to her daily routine and professional confidence. The first major change came through the building's parking situation. The previous owner had maintained an informal arrangement where long-term tenants could reserve premium parking spaces in the underground garage for a modest monthly fee. Sophia had enjoyed a prime spot near the elevator for over 2 years, a convenience that saved her the indignity of street parking or the expense of nearby commercial lots. I instructed Martha to send notices to all tenants that the parking system was being restructured to better reflect market rates and demand. Premium spots would now be allocated through a monthly bidding system, with spaces going to the highest bidders. The starting bid for Sophia's coveted spot was $800 per month, nearly 4 times what she had been paying. When she called me 3 days later, her frustration was palpable. "Mom, I swear this building is trying to drive out all the professional tenants. Now they want me to bid on my own parking space like it's some kind of auction. $800 a month just to park my car in the same spot I've been using for years?" "That does seem expensive," I agreed,
Though privately, I was delighted that she was finally experiencing what it felt like to have someone else control her access to basic necessities. Are you going to bid on it? I don't know. It's the principle of the thing. I earned that spot through seniority and consistent payments. Now some anonymous owner wants to squeeze every possible dollar out of the building without any regard for the community that's been built here. Maybe the new owner has financial pressures you don't know about. That's not my problem. If someone can't afford to own a building like this without gouging the tenants, they shouldn't have bought it in the first place. We're not just income sources, we're professionals who deserve some stability and respect. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. She expected understanding for her financial constraints while showing no empathy for others who might struggle with housing costs.
The woman who lived in a luxury apartment and worked for a prestigious firm was complaining about parking fees to the mother she had dismissed for living in a trailer. What will you do if you don't get the spot? I'll have to find street parking or pay for a monthly spot at that commercial garage 6 blocks away. Do you know how humiliating it is to show up at work looking like you've been walking through city traffic because you can't afford premium parking? My colleagues will notice. Clients will notice. I'm sure people will understand that parking is expensive in Manhattan. It's not about understanding. It's about perception. When you work in a field like mine, every detail matters. Where you live, how you present yourself, even where you park your car. It all contributes to the image of success and competence that clients expect. After she hung up, I sat in my modest studio apartment, reflecting on the woman I had raised and the value she had somehow acquired despite my efforts to teach her differently. I remembered the nights when she was in high school, when I would pick her up from late study sessions or school events. She never seemed embarrassed then when I arrived in my 15-year-old Honda with the dent in the passenger door. She would climb in gratefully, chattering about her day while I drove through our small town's quiet streets. When had she become someone who judged people based on where they parked their cars? The parking situation resolved itself exactly as I had anticipated. Sophia bid $600 for her spot, confident that her long tenure and professional status would give her an edge. But I had instructed Martha to ensure that a mystery bidder, actually another company I owned, would outbid any tenant by exactly $50. Sophia lost her spot to someone who bid $650, and I watched through building security cameras as she walked 6 blocks from the commercial garage in her expensive heels, her professional composure slightly wilted by the time she reached the office. But the parking was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. 2 weeks later, I met with the partners of Crawford Mitchell and Associates again, this time in my role as building owner reviewing their lease renewal application. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the building's conference room, and I arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents that would change Sophia's life forever. Richard Crawford greeted me with slightly less confidence than he had shown in our first meeting. The building changes had clearly unsettled him, and he was no longer certain about his firm's negotiating position. James Mitchell looked tired, probably from dealing with client complaints about the building's new restrictions and fees. And Sophia sat across from me with barely concealed hostility, her professional mask slipping enough to reveal her frustration with the woman she held responsible for disrupting her perfect life. "Ms. Martinez," Richard began, "we appreciate you taking the time to discuss our lease renewal. As we mentioned in our previous meeting, Crawford, Mitchell and Associates has been a model tenant, and we're hoping to reach an agreement that recognizes our value to the building." I opened my portfolio and pulled out a thick document, placing it on the table where they could see the official seal and legal formatting. "I've had my team conduct a comprehensive review of your firm's tenancy, and I have some concerns I'd like to discuss." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. James Mitchell straightened in his chair, his lawyer instincts engaging. "What kind of concerns?" "Let's start with lease compliance.
I pulled out a second document, this one filled with dates, times, and detailed observations. My building management team has documented numerous violations of your lease agreement over the past 18 months. Sophia leaned forward, her professional training kicking in despite her personal feelings about me. What violations? We've been extremely careful to follow all building policies. I smiled at her, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. After-hours elevator usage for non-emergency purposes, unauthorized use of common areas for client entertainment, exceeding occupancy limits in conference rooms, and improper disposal of confidential documents. Richard Crawford's face reddened slightly. These are minor infractions at best. Every business in this building has occasionally needed to be flexible with space usage. The previous management never had issues with our operations. The previous management wasn't holding tenants to appropriate professional standards. I am. I pulled out photographs taken by the building's security cameras showing various incidents that could be interpreted as lease violations. Ms. Rodriguez, I believe you were present for several of these incidents. Sophia stared at the photographs, recognizing herself in several of them. Late-night meetings that had run past building quiet hours, client receptions held in the lobby without proper permits, conference calls that had spilled into hallways during busy periods. These are normal business activities, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Any reasonable landlord would understand that professional services requires some flexibility in space usage. Any reasonable tenant would understand that lease agreements exist for good reasons. But let's move on to the financial aspects of your renewal. I pulled out another document, this one containing market research and comparable lease rates. Based on current Manhattan commercial real estate values, your firm has been paying significantly below market rate for your space. The number I placed in front of them represented a 400% increase over their current rent. Not because the space was worth that much more than they were paying, but because I wanted to see their reaction to being priced out of their comfortable situation. James Mitchell stared at the number, his face going pale. This is completely unreasonable. This would quadruple our occupancy costs. This is market rate for premium office space in Soho. If your firm can't afford market rate, perhaps you should consider relocating to space that better fits your budget. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I was using the same logic Sophia had applied to my trailer. If you can't afford to maintain your lifestyle in a desirable location, maybe you don't deserve to be there. Ms. Martinez, Richard said carefully, we think there may be some misunderstanding about market conditions. While we're prepared to discuss reasonable increases, this level of adjustment would be financially devastating to our firm. I'm not running a charity, Mr. Crawford. I'm operating a business. If you can't afford the real cost of occupying this space, there are other tenants who can. Sophia spoke up, her voice tight with controlled anger. What other tenants? You're driving out everyone who's been here for years with these arbitrary changes and unreasonable demands. You're going to end up with an empty building. I looked directly at her, letting a small smile play at the corners of my mouth. I'd rather have an empty building than one filled with tenants who think they're entitled to below-market rates because of their previous arrangements.
Quality tenants pay quality prices without complaint. Quality tenants? Sophia's professional composure finally cracked. We are quality tenants. We're successful professionals who bring prestige to this building. We're not some fly-by-night operation trying to get a deal. Are you? Because from what I see in these documents, you're a firm that's been taking advantage of lenient management for years, paying below-market rent while violating lease terms and expecting special treatment because of your perceived status. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. We don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly doesn't understand the value we bring to this building. I remained seated, looking up at her with calm interest. Please, sit down, Miss Rodriguez. We're not finished discussing your situation. My situation? Your residential lease is also up for review. As a month-to-month tenant, you're subject to the same market adjustments as your firm.
She sat down slowly, the color draining from her face, as she realized that I controlled not just her workplace, but her home as well. "What are you saying?" I pulled out yet another document, this one outlining the new rental rates for residential units in the building. Sophia's apartment, which she had been renting for $3,800 per month, was now listed at $12,000. "Your apartment is significantly undervalued based on current market conditions. The new rental rate reflects what similar units are commanding in comparable buildings throughout Manhattan." James Mitchell found his voice first. "You can't triple someone's rent overnight. There are legal protections for tenants. Month-to-month tenants have very limited protections, as I'm sure you know." Ms. Rodriguez chose flexibility over security when she negotiated her lease terms. Now she's experiencing the downside of that flexibility. Sophia stared at the rental increase notice, her hands trembling slightly. $12,000 a month? That's more than most people's annual salary. It's the market rate for luxury housing in this neighborhood. If you can't afford it, there are more suitable accommodations available in other areas of the city. The phrase hit her like a physical blow. I was repeating almost exactly what she had said to me about finding a senior community that better fit my budget, what she had implied about people who couldn't afford to live in prestigious locations. "Miss Martinez," Richard Crawford said, "I think we need to approach this more reasonably. These increases would force both our firm and Miss Rodriguez out of the building entirely." "That's a possibility," I agreed. "But it would also allow me to bring in tenants who appreciate the value of this location and are willing to pay appropriately for it." Sophia looked across the table at me with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you're destroying. Do you understand what it takes to build a professional reputation in this city? How hard it is to establish yourself in a competitive field? You're talking about demolishing years of work with these arbitrary changes." "I understand that success requires adaptation. If your career can't survive a change in your working environment, perhaps it wasn't as solid as you thought." She stood up again, this time with finality. "I don't have to listen to this. We'll find other space. There are plenty of landlords in this city who understand the value of maintaining good relationships with quality tenants." "Of course, you're free to leave any time. I'll have building management prepare your termination notices." As the three lawyers filed out of the conference room, I could hear Sophia's voice carrying down the hallway. Completely unreasonable, obviously doesn't understand, probably never dealt with professional tenants before. I packed up my documents slowly, savoring the moment. Sophia had no idea that the woman she was dismissing as inexperienced and unreasonable was the same person who had built a real estate empire worth more than her law firm's annual revenue. She was about to learn that professional success meant nothing without the wisdom to treat people with respect, regardless of their apparent circumstances. But I wasn't done with her education, not even close. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched through building security monitors as Sophia's carefully constructed life began to unravel. She spent her lunch hours touring alternative office spaces, her evenings searching apartment listings, her weekends meeting with real estate agents who showed her properties that were either too expensive, too small, or too far from the professional district where she needed to maintain her image. The Manhattan real estate market was working exactly as I anticipated. Commercial space comparable to what Crawford, Mitchell, and Associates currently occupied was either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. Residential apartments that met Sophia's standards were rare and demanded immediate decisions with significant deposits. Meanwhile, I continued implementing changes that made her current situation increasingly untenable. The building's internet service was upgraded to a new provider that required extensive installation work during business hours. The HVAC system received preventative maintenance that left certain floors uncomfortably warm or cold for days at a time. The elevators were modernized with new software that caused frequent delays and occasional shutdowns. Each inconvenience was professionally explained, properly documented, and legally justified. Sophia couldn't complain about building improvements that were designed to enhance the property's value and tenant experience. She could only endure the disruption and try to maintain her professional composure while her work environment became increasingly chaotic. The breaking point came when I decided to address the building's security concerns. I hired a consulting firm to conduct a comprehensive security assessment, which predictably found numerous vulnerabilities that required immediate attention.
The main lobby would need to be reconstructed to create proper security checkpoints. The elevator system required new access controls that would restrict tenant movement between floors. Most importantly, the building's professional image demanded a dress code for all occupants and visitors. The dress code memo went out on a Friday afternoon, requiring business formal attire at all times in common areas, with specific guidelines that would have made my grandmother's conservative church look casual by comparison. No casual wear, no athletic shoes, no visible tattoos, and no clothing that could be interpreted as unprofessional by the building's sophisticated clientele. Sophia called me that evening, her voice shaking with rage. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. This building owner is completely insane. She's trying to control what we wear, how we move through our own workplace, even who we can have as visitors. It's like living under a dictatorship." That does sound excessive, I agreed, though I was actually quite proud of how thoroughly I had disrupted her sense of entitlement. I found an apartment in Brooklyn that I can actually afford, but it means commuting an hour each way, and the only office space we can get is in Midtown, which isn't terrible, but it's not the same caliber as Soho. My entire professional network is based around this neighborhood. Sometimes change is necessary, even when it's difficult. Change? This isn't change. This is harassment. This woman bought our building and decided to make our lives miserable for no reason. She doesn't understand what she's destroying. I almost laughed at the irony. Sophia was experiencing exactly what she had wanted me to experience when she suggested I move to a senior community and sell my trailer. The difference was that I was making business decisions based on market realities, while she had simply wanted to get rid of the mother who embarrassed her. Have you tried talking to her directly? Maybe if you explained your situation. She won't meet with tenants individually. Everything goes through that horrible property management company she hired. They just keep saying that building improvements require temporary inconveniences and that market rate pricing reflects the property's true value. Maybe she has a point about the market rates. Mom, whose side are you on? I'm about to lose everything I've worked for because some greedy landlord decided to squeeze every penny out of a building. This isn't about market rates. This is about greed and power and destroying people's lives for profit. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I was destroying her life, though not for profit. I was doing it because she had destroyed something in me when she called me trailer trash and dismissed everything I represented. But I wasn't about to admit that to her. I'm always on your side, sweetheart. I just think sometimes we have to adapt to circumstances we can't control. Adapt? I've adapted my entire life. I adapted to growing up in a trailer park by working twice as hard as everyone else. I adapted to having a mother who cleaned hotel rooms by building a career that would make up for my background. I adapted to being the only person in my professional circle who came from nothing by becoming someone who earned her place through merit instead of family connections. Her words hit me like a physical blow. She had spent her adult life adapting to the embarrassment of being my daughter. Every achievement, every professional milestone, every aspect of her carefully constructed identity was designed to distance herself from the woman who had raised her. Sophia, I never asked you to be ashamed of where you came from. You never had to ask. Do you think I didn't notice how different our life was from my classmates' families? Do you think I didn't understand what it meant when their parents came to school events in nice cars, wearing professional clothes, while my mother showed up straight from her cleaning job? I closed my eyes, remembering those school events she was talking about. The parent-teacher conferences where I would arrive in my uniform because I couldn't afford to take time off to go home and change. The graduation ceremonies where I sat alone because I couldn't invite friends I didn't have to witness my daughter's achievements. The awards banquets where I beamed with pride while other parents networked and made connections I could never provide for her. I was proud of you at every one of those events, I said quietly. I know you were, but I was also embarrassed, and I hated myself for being embarrassed, which made it worse. So I decided that when I grew up, I would create a life where I never had to feel that shame again.
And now you're losing that life. Yes, because someone with money and power decided that my success was inconvenient for their business plans. Just like that, years of work wiped out by someone else's greed. After she hung up, I sat in my studio apartment, looking out at the lights of the city where my daughter was struggling to maintain the life she had built to escape me. I felt a moment of doubt about what I was doing. She was suffering, genuinely suffering, and I was the cause of that pain. But then I remembered her voice when she called me trailer trash. I remembered the coldness when I was facing foreclosure and needed her help. I remembered her explaining to her colleagues why people like me didn't deserve to occupy the same spaces as people like her. My daughter had made her choices about the kind of person she wanted to be. Now she was learning what it felt like to be on the receiving end of those choices. The following Monday, I received a call from Martha Gonzalez with news I had been expecting. Miss Martinez, Crawford Mitchell and Associates has formally notified us that they won't be renewing their lease. They're vacating the premises at the end of next month. And Miss Rodriguez? She's moving out as well. Gave her 30-day notice this morning. I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because my plan was working exactly as intended. Sadness because forcing my daughter out of her home and workplace felt like a final severing of whatever relationship we might have salvaged.
But I wasn't finished with Sophia's education. Losing her apartment and office was just the first lesson. She needed to understand not just what it felt like to be displaced, but what it felt like to be judged and dismissed by someone who controlled her future. I had one more surprise waiting for her, and it would be delivered in the most poetic way possible. 3 weeks later, Sophia called me from what sounded like a very different environment than her usual office setting. The background noise suggested she was in a coffee shop or some other public space, and her voice carried the stress of someone whose professional life had been turned upside down. "Mom, I have some news. Crawford Mitchell and Associates is dissolving. The partners couldn't agree on how to handle the increased overhead from relocating, and 2 major clients dropped us when they heard we were moving out of the Soho building." "I'm sorry to hear that, honey. Richard and James are both joining other firms, but they can't take me with them. The firms they're joining already have enough junior associates, and my specialization doesn't fit what they need." I waited for her to continue, knowing that this conversation was heading toward a request for help. I'm going to have to start over, basically. Find a new firm or maybe try to start my own practice. But that takes capital I don't have right now, especially with moving expenses and the higher rent in Brooklyn. That sounds very stressful. It is, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I've been thinking about our last conversation, about adapting to circumstances we can't control. I think maybe I haven't been very good at that. This was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from her since our devastating phone call months earlier. But it wasn't quite an apology. It was more like an acknowledgement that her strategies weren't working anymore. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I've been too focused on maintaining a certain image instead of focusing on what really matters. Like family. Like the people who've always been there for me even when I haven't been there for them." My heart ached listening to her words. She was reaching out, maybe trying to rebuild the bridge she had burned when she called me trailer trash. Part of me wanted to reveal everything, to tell her who I really was and offer her the financial security that could solve all her problems. But she still hadn't acknowledged the cruelty of what she had said to me. She hadn't apologized for dismissing me when I needed her help. She was sorry that her life had become difficult, but she wasn't sorry for the pain she had caused me. "I think focusing on family is always important," I said carefully. "Mom, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I was wondering if I could maybe stay with you for a while, just until I get back on my feet professionally. I could contribute to household expenses, help with chores, whatever you need." The request took my breath away. My daughter, who had been ashamed of my trailer home, who had called me trailer trash,
who had explained to her colleagues why people like we didn't deserve to live in nice places, was asking to move back in with me. Stay with me where, Sophia? In your trailer. I know it's small, and I know it's not what either of us would prefer, but I'm running out of options. The Brooklyn apartment fell through, the landlord decided to rent to someone else, and I can't afford a Manhattan apartment without a steady job. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the poetic justice of the moment. The daughter who'd dismissed my home as unsuitable for decent people was now asking to live there because she couldn't afford anything better. I need to think about it, I said. Of course! I know it's a big ask, but Mom, I want you to know that I've learned a lot about myself these past few months, about what really matters and what doesn't, about how quickly circumstances can change, and how important it is to have people in your life who care about you for who you are, not what you have. After we hung up, I walked to the window of my studio apartment and looked out at the city where my daughter was learning hard lessons about humility and family loyalty. She was finally beginning to understand what I had tried to teach her years earlier, that success without character was meaningless, and that treating people well regardless of their circumstances was the only way to build relationships that could survive difficult times. But she still didn't know who I really was. She still didn't know that the woman she was asking for help was the same woman who had orchestrated her downfall. She didn't know that her trailer trash mother was worth more money than she would ever see in her professional lifetime. And I wasn't ready to tell her yet, because there was one more lesson she needed to learn, and it could only be taught by giving her exactly what she was asking for. 2 days after Sophia's desperate phone call, I made a decision that would bring my carefully orchestrated plan to its climax. I called her back with an answer that would set the stage for the most important conversation of both our lives. Sophia, I've thought about your request to stay with me, and yes, you can come home. The relief in her voice was palpable. Really? Mom, thank you so much. I know this isn't ideal for either of us, but I promise I'll make it work. I'll contribute to household expenses, help with chores, whatever you need. There are some conditions we need to discuss. Of course, whatever you think is reasonable. First, I need you to understand that this is a temporary arrangement while you get back on your feet professionally. Second, to respect my home and my routines. And third, we're going to have some very honest conversations about our relationship and how we treat each other. Absolutely. Mom, I really appreciate this opportunity to spend time together. I think it might be good for both of us. After she hung up, I sat in my studio apartment and began planning the most complex performance of my life. For the next phase of my plan to work, I needed to temporarily return to being the woman Sophia expected me to be. The hotel housekeeper, living in a trailer park, struggling to make ends meet, grateful for any attention from her successful daughter. I called Mrs. Patterson at the hotel and asked about returning to work. She was delighted to have me back, especially since the employee we had hired to replace me wasn't working out. Within a week, I was back in my familiar uniform, cleaning rooms and scrubbing bathrooms while secretly owning a real estate empire worth more than most people could imagine.
The hardest part was returning to the trailer. I had maintained the property during my absence, paying the bills and keeping it in good condition, but walking back into those small rooms felt like stepping backwards through time. Everything was exactly as it had been when I left months earlier. The kitchen table where I had received the foreclosure notice, the living room where I had listened to my daughter call me trailer trash, the bedroom where I had cried myself to sleep after learning what she really thought of me. But now, these rooms would serve a different purpose. They would become the classroom where Sophia would learn the most important lessons of her life. She arrived on a Saturday morning in a rental truck loaded with the remnants of her Manhattan existence. I watched through the window as she sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring at the trailer that would be her new home. Her expensive clothes looked out of place in the gravel driveway of Sunset Valley Trailer Park. Her designer luggage seemed absurd next to the modest homes with their small gardens and aging cars. When she finally knocked on the door, her smile was forced but determined. "Hi, Mom. I'm ready to start over." I hugged her, and for a moment, the familiar warmth of holding my child almost made me forget the months of planning that had led to this moment. Almost. "Welcome home, sweetheart." The first week was an exercise in barely controlled tension. Sophia tried to maintain her pleasant demeanor, but I could see her struggling with the reality of her new circumstances. The trailer that had seemed small when she was a child now felt cramped and confining to someone accustomed to luxury. The thin walls meant we could hear each other's every movement. The single bathroom required coordination of schedules. The small kitchen made preparing meals an exercise in efficiency rather than comfort. She spent most of her time on the phone, calling contacts in the legal field, trying to find job opportunities that would allow her to rebuild her career. But her references were complicated by the dissolution of her former firm, and her specialization in corporate law was less valuable without the prestigious credentials and connections she had lost. I maintained my role as the struggling hotel housekeeper, leaving for work each morning in my uniform and returning each evening with stories about difficult guests and demanding supervisors. Sophia would nod sympathetically, occasionally offering advice about dealing with workplace stress or difficult people, unaware that I was studying her reactions and planning my next move. The breakthrough came during our second week living together. Sophia had spent the day on a particularly frustrating series of job interviews, and she came home visibly upset. She slumped onto the small couch in our living room and let her professional composure finally crack. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this anymore." "What happened today?" "I interviewed with 3 firms and they all basically said the same thing. My resume is impressive, but they're concerned about the circumstances of leaving my last position. When I explained that the firm dissolved due to real estate issues, they want to know why a successful law firm couldn't handle a simple rent increase." I sat across from her, maintaining my expression of motherly concern while internally cataloging every word. "What do you tell them?" "The truth. That we had a landlord who was unreasonable and greedy, who drove out long-term tenants with arbitrary changes and excessive demands. But when I say it out loud, it sounds like we weren't capable of adapting to normal business challenges." "Maybe there's another way to explain it." "There isn't, because the truth is we weren't prepared for someone to treat us like we didn't matter. We assumed our reputation and professional status would protect us from being pushed around by property owners. We were wrong." She was so close to understanding, so close to making the connection between her experience and mine, but she hadn't quite reached the critical insight I was waiting for. It must be frustrating to feel powerless in that situation. That's exactly it, powerless. I spent my entire adult life building power and influence, and it all disappeared the moment someone with more power decided I was inconvenient. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice gentle but probing. "What do you think you could have done differently?" "I don't know. Maybe if I had tried to build a better relationship with the new owner? Maybe if I had approached the situation with more humility instead of expecting my professional status to matter." Progress. She was beginning to recognize that her attitude might have contributed to her problems. "Tell me about this building owner. What was she like?" Sophia's expression darkened. "Honestly, she was everything I hate about people who get a little power and use it to make others miserable. Middle-aged, obviously not from our social circle, probably never had to work in a competitive professional environment. She dressed like someone who shopped at department stores and thought that owning one building made her some kind of real estate mogul." Every word was like a knife, but I kept my expression neutral. "She sounds difficult." She was worse than difficult. She was vindictive. It was like she had some personal agenda against successful people, like she resented anyone who had achieved more than she had. "What makes you think it was personal?" "The way she looked at me during our meetings, like she was judging me for something I couldn't control. And the questions she asked about worthiness and cultural background, it was like she thought successful people didn't deserve their success unless they came from the right circumstances." The irony was
breathtaking. Sophia was describing exactly the same judgment she had passed on me, but she couldn't see the parallel because she still viewed herself as the victim rather than the perpetrator of that kind of thinking. Maybe she had reasons for her attitudes that you didn't understand. What reasons could justify destroying people's lives? She had the power to make reasonable business decisions, but instead she chose to be cruel and vindictive. People like that shouldn't have power over others. People like what? People who are bitter about their own limitations and take it out on others? People who can't stand to see others succeed because it reminds them of what they'll never achieve? I stood up from the couch, no longer able to maintain my calm exterior. The portrait she was painting of the building owner, of me, was so twisted, so completely disconnected from reality that I felt my carefully constructed patience finally snap. Sophia, I need to tell you something. Something in my tone must have warned her that this conversation was about to change direction dramatically. She looked up at me with sudden wariness.
What is it? I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept important documents. The same drawer where I had stored the foreclosure notice months earlier. But now it contained different papers. Property deeds, investment statements, and business incorporation documents that told the real story of Elena Martinez. I returned to the living room and placed the documents on the coffee table where she could see them. The woman who destroyed your life, the vindictive building owner who drove you out of your apartment and your job, that was me. Sophia stared at the papers, her mind clearly struggling to process what I was showing her. Property ownership documents for 1247 Spring Street. Business licenses for the companies I used to manage my real estate investments. Bank statements showing assets that dwarfed anything she had ever imagined. I don't understand. I own the building where you worked and lived. I'm the one who raised your rent, changed the building policies, and made your life impossible. I'm the middle-aged woman who dressed like she shopped at department stores and had the audacity to question your worthiness. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally horror. That's impossible. You're a hotel housekeeper. You live in a trailer park. You are facing foreclosure. I'm a hotel housekeeper by choice. I live in a trailer park because it's where I raised you and where I'm comfortable. And the foreclosure was never a real threat because I have enough money to buy this entire trailer park if I wanted to. I picked up one of the investment statements and handed it to her. This is just one of my portfolios. I own 17 rental properties, 4 commercial buildings, and have a net worth of approximately $8 million. Sophia looked at the numbers on the page, and I watched her entire worldview crumble in real time. $8 million? But you said you needed help with medical bills. You said you couldn't afford the mortgage on the trailer. I never said I couldn't afford anything. I said I received a foreclosure notice, which was true. I said the medical bills had been expensive, which was also true. But I never said I couldn't pay them. Why? Why would you lie to me about this? I sat back down across from her, the documents spread between us like evidence in a trial. Because I wanted you to think you were talking to trailer trash when you hung up on me during the worst crisis of my life. I wanted you to think you were dismissing the pleas of a poor, powerless woman who didn't deserve your help. The color drained from her face as she remembered our conversation from months earlier. Mom, I was stressed about the vacation and I didn't understand how serious. You understood perfectly. Your father-in-law was collapsing, possibly dying, and I was begging my only family for help. You chose a spa vacation over my emergency because you thought I was beneath your consideration. I made a mistake. No, Sophia. You revealed who you really are. You showed me that you're the kind of person who judges others based on their circumstances rather than their character. You demonstrated that you think success gives you the right to dismiss people who have less than you do. She was crying now, but I wasn't finished. So I decided to teach you what it feels like to be judged by someone with more power than you have. To show you what happens when someone decides you don't deserve the life you've built. The building, the lease changes, forcing out my firm, that was all planned? Every single decision was calculated to make you experience exactly what you wanted me to experience. You told me that people who can't afford to maintain their lifestyles in desirable locations should find somewhere more appropriate. So I made your lifestyle unaffordable and forced you to find somewhere more appropriate. Sophia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. I can't believe this is happening. You can't believe that actions have consequences? You can't believe that treating people cruelly might come back to affect you? She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I can't believe my own mother orchestrated the destruction of my entire life as some kind of revenge scheme. Not revenge, Sophia. Education. You needed to learn lessons that I apparently failed to teach you when you were growing up. What lessons? That you shouldn't trust anyone? That family will betray you if you hurt their feelings? I stood up again, angry at her continued inability to see the real issue. That you shouldn't dismiss people based on their circumstances, that treating others with cruelty and contempt makes you a cruel and contemptible person, that success without character is worthless. So you decided to destroy my character by lying to me for months? I decided to show you what your character looks like when you're on the receiving end of it. We stared at each other across the small living room, the trailer suddenly feeling even smaller than usual. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of misunderstanding and months of deception. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? That depends on you. What do you mean? I mean that you have a choice to make about what kind of person you want to be going forward. You can continue to see yourself as the victim of someone else's vindictiveness, or you can recognize that this entire situation exists because of how you chose to treat someone you claimed to love. I never meant to hurt you. Yes, you did. When I called you for help, you deliberately chose to be cruel rather than compassionate. You wanted to hurt me because my problems were inconvenient for your vacation. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents that had shattered her understanding of our relationship. I called you trailer trash?
Yes, you did. I said I was ashamed of where I came from. You said that successful people don't live in trailer parks, and that you couldn't have people knowing you came from this background. I said horrible things about you to people at work. I'm sure you did. She looked around the trailer, seeing it with new eyes. Not as the embarrassing home she had escaped from, but as the place where a woman worth $8 million had chosen to raise her daughter with love and sacrifice. You could have lived anywhere. You could have given me advantages I never imagined. I could have, but I wanted you to learn the value of hard work and education. I wanted you to build your own success, not rely on family wealth. Instead, I built success and then used it to look down on the woman who made it possible. For the first time since I had revealed the truth, Sophia seemed to be grasping the real magnitude of what she had done. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you can fix it, but you can start by understanding why it needed to be fixed in the first place. I treated you like you didn't matter. You treated me like trailer trash. You dismissed me when I needed you most. You hung up on me during a medical emergency because helping your family was less important than your vacation plans. And then I spent months complaining to you about how someone was treating me the same way without ever making the connection. Without ever making the connection, I agreed. Sophia stood up from the couch and walked to the window that looked out over the trailer park. The same window where I had watched her arrive a week earlier, carrying the remnants of her destroyed life. The building owner I described to you, vindictive, bitter, resentful of other people's success, that was really how I saw you, wasn't it? That was how you saw someone who dared to challenge your sense of entitlement. Just like I saw you as someone who didn't deserve respect because you lived in a trailer park and cleaned hotel rooms. Even though the woman in the trailer park was your mother, who had sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. Even though the woman in the trailer park was actually more successful than I could ever imagine being. She turned back to face me, her eyes red from crying, but clearer than they had been in months. I'd destroyed our relationship because I was ashamed of you. And then you destroyed my life to show me what shame feels like. I showed you what it feels like to be dismissed by someone who thinks they're better than you. And now I understand why that experience was so devastating. Because it wasn't just about losing my apartment or my job. It was about having someone I expected to respect me treat me like I didn't matter. Someone you expected to respect you because of your professional success and social status. The same things I thought made me better than you. We stood on opposite sides of the small living room, looking at each other across a chasm that had taken months to create and might take years to bridge. Sophia, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this because I enjoy causing pain. I did it because you needed to learn empathy. And apparently, the only way to teach you empathy was to make you experience what I experienced. Did it work? I don't know. That depends on what you do with this knowledge. What do you want me to do? I want you to become the kind of person who would never call anyone trailer trash. I want you to become someone who judges people by their character rather than their circumstances. I want you to become the daughter I thought I was raising. Sophia walked back to the couch and sat down heavily, her professional composure completely gone. I don't know how to be that person. I have spent so many years building an identity around being better than where I came from. If I'm not superior to my background, then who am I? You're my daughter. You're a smart, educated woman who has the capacity for kindness and compassion if you choose to develop those qualities. You're someone who has been given a rare opportunity to start over with complete honesty about who you are and where you come from. With my mother, who is secretly a millionaire real estate mogul. With your mother, who loves you enough to spend months teaching you the hardest lesson of your life. She looked at me with something approaching wonder. You really orchestrated all of this? The building purchase, the policy changes, everything? Everything. Every inconvenience you experienced was designed to show you what it feels like to be powerless in the face of someone else's decisions. And the lease increases that forced out my firm? Calculated to be just high enough to make your position untenable while appearing to be legitimate business decisions. The dress codes and security changes? Designed to make you feel controlled and judged by someone else's standards. My God. She shook her head slowly. I had no idea you were capable of something this elaborate. I had no idea I was capable of it either. But then, I had no idea my own daughter was capable of calling me trailer trash and hanging up on me during an emergency. You hurt me that badly? Sophia, you broke my heart. Not just because of what you said, but because of what it revealed about who you had become. Someone who thought success meant never having to acknowledge where I came from. Someone who thought success meant looking down on the people who helped you achieve it. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the enormity of what had been revealed. Outside, the trailer park was quiet in the late afternoon sun. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their neighbor was having the most important conversation of her existence with the daughter who had spent years being ashamed of this place. Finally, Sophia spoke again. What happens to my career now? I mean, I still need to find work, and my references are still complicated by what happened with the firm. That's up to you. You can rebuild your career based on your skills and work ethic, or you can continue trying to rely on prestige and connections.
And what about us? What happens to our relationship? That's also up to you. You can choose to see this as an unforgivable betrayal, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity to build a relationship based on honesty instead of shame. I want to choose the second option. Then you need to start by apologizing for the person you became, not just for the things you said. Sophia looked at me directly, her eyes still red but determined. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being ashamed of you. I'm sorry for dismissing your emergency because it was inconvenient for me. I'm sorry for calling you trailer trash. I'm sorry for spending years trying to distance myself from the woman who sacrificed everything for my success. And I'm sorry for becoming the kind of person who could do those things. It was the apology I had been waiting months to hear. Not just regret for her actions, but acknowledgement of the character flaws that had made those actions possible. Thank you. Do you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, sitting in the trailer she had been embarrassed to call home, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had lost when she chose pride over love. I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. You have to rebuild my trust, and more importantly, you have to rebuild yourself into someone worthy of that trust. How do I do that? You start by treating everyone you meet with the same respect you would want them to show your mother. You judge people by their character, not their circumstances. You remember that success without kindness is just another form of failure. And what about your secret fortune? What happens with that? I smiled for the first time since the conversation began. That's a discussion for another day. Right now, let's focus on you learning to be happy in this trailer with this mother, regardless of how much money is or isn't in the bank. I think I can do that. I hope so. Because if you can learn to be proud of this life, of this family, of where you came from, then maybe you'll be ready to hear about where we're going next. The weeks that followed our confrontation transformed both of our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sophia threw herself into rebuilding not just her career, but her entire approach to how she interacted with the world. She took a job at a small legal aid clinic, making a fraction of what she had earned at Crawford, Mitchell and Associates, but working with clients who reminded her daily that circumstances didn't define character. I watched her come home each evening, exhausted, but somehow more alive than she had been during her corporate days. She would tell me about elderly clients facing eviction, single mothers fighting custody battles, immigrants navigating complex legal systems, people who needed legal help but couldn't afford prestigious law firms, people like the woman she used to be ashamed to call her mother. There's this grandmother, Mrs. Chen, Sophia told me one evening as we shared dinner at our small kitchen table. She's being evicted from the apartment where she's lived for 25 years because the new owner wants to convert the building to condos. She speaks limited English, has no savings for a lawyer, and was about to just give up and move in with relatives in another state. Were you able to help her? We found housing law violations that the landlord will have to address before any eviction can proceed. It bought her time and leverage to negotiate a fair settlement. Sophia paused, pushing food around her plate. A few months ago, I would have looked at Mrs. Chen and seen someone who didn't understand how business works. Now I see someone fighting to keep her home, just like you were. These moments of insight came regularly now. Sophia was making connections between her work and her own behavior, recognizing the humanity in people she previously would have dismissed. It was painful to watch sometimes, seeing her confront the prejudices she had carried for years, but it was also hopeful. 3 months after our confrontation, she came home with news that would test everything we had rebuilt. "Mom, I got a job offer today." "That's wonderful. Tell me about it." "Hartwell, Davis and Partners. They're one of the most prestigious corporate firms in the city. The partner who interviewed me said they were impressed with my background and legal expertise. They want me to start as a senior associate with a path to partnership." I set down my coffee cup, studying her expression. "That sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity you'd been working toward." "It is. The salary is more than double what I'm making at the legal aid clinic. I'd have my own office, high-profile clients, all the prestige I thought I needed." She was quiet for a moment. "But I'd also be working 80-hour weeks again, competing with colleagues who see success the way I used to see it." "What way is that?" "As something that makes you better than other people, as a reason to look down on anyone who hasn't achieved what you have." "And how do you see success now?" Sophia looked around our small trailer, taking in the modest furniture and family photos, the simple life we had been sharing. "I think success is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like the person you see. It's treating everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances. It's remembering where you came from and being grateful for the people who helped you get where you are." Those are good definitions, but they don't answer whether you should take the job. I know I can do the work.
I know I can be successful in that environment again, but I'm afraid of becoming who I was before. I'm afraid that being around that kind of wealth and prestige will make me forget the lessons I've learned. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sophia, the person you were before didn't know any better.
The person you are now does. That makes all the difference. Does it? What if the pressure and competition bring out the worst in me again? Then you'll recognize it and make different choices. That's what growth means. Not becoming perfect, but becoming aware enough to choose who you want to be. She was quiet for several minutes, considering my words. There's something else. If I take this job, I'll be able to afford my own apartment again. A nice one. I could move out of here and rebuild the kind of life I had before. Is that what you want? Part of me does. Part of me misses the independence and luxury. But another part of me is afraid that leaving here means leaving behind everything I've learned about what really matters. What really matters doesn't depend on where you live, Sophia. It depends on who you choose to be wherever you are. The next morning, she called Hartwell, Davis & Partners and accepted their offer. But she also made a decision that surprised both of us. I want to keep living here, she announced after hanging up the phone. In the trailer? If you'll have me. I know I can afford my own place now, but I like sharing meals with you. I like having someone to talk to about my day. I like being reminded every morning of where I come from and what you sacrificed for me. Honey, you don't have to stay here out of guilt or obligation. I'm not. I'm staying because this feels like home in a way my Manhattan apartment never did. That place was about impressing other people. This place is about being with family. 6 months later, Sophia was thriving at her new firm while maintaining the perspective she had gained during our time together. She took on pro bono cases that reminded her of her legal aid work. She mentored young lawyers from backgrounds similar to hers. She spoke up in meetings when colleagues made dismissive comments about clients or opposing counsel. More importantly, she had developed friendships with our neighbors in the trailer park. Mrs. Rodriguez next door, whose husband worked construction and whose daughter was applying to colleges, the Morrison family across the way, who invited us to barbecues where Sophia would play board games with their kids. The community she had once been embarrassed by had become a source of genuine connection and support. One evening, as we sat on our small deck watching the sunset, Sophia brought up the question I had been waiting for. Mom, can I ask you about your real estate business? Of course. How did you build something so successful while working at the hotel and raising me? I had been thinking about how to answer this question for months. I started small. When you were little, I saved every penny I could and bought a rundown duplex across town. I fixed it up myself, rented out both sides, and used that income to buy another property. Each investment funded the next one. But that takes incredible discipline and financial knowledge. Where did you learn about real estate investing? The library. I read every book about property investment and financial planning they had. I studied market trends, learned about tax laws, figured out which neighborhoods were likely to appreciate in value, while working full-time and raising a child alone, while making sure you had everything you needed for school, and never doubted that your education was my top priority. She shook her head in amazement. I can't believe I spent years thinking you were just a hotel housekeeper. I am a hotel housekeeper. I'm also a real estate investor. People can be more than one thing, Sophia. That's what I'm learning. At work, some of my colleagues assume that because I live in a trailer park, I must not be very successful or ambitious. They're shocked when they realize I'm one of the top billers in my division. How do you handle their assumptions? I tell them that success isn't about where you live. It's about the quality of your work and the integrity of your character. I tell them that some of the most impressive people I know live in modest homes and work jobs that don't come with fancy titles. That's a good answer. I learned it from my mother, who spent 30 years building a multi-million-dollar business while everyone assumes she was just cleaning hotel rooms.
As the sun set over our trailer park, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Not because I had gotten revenge on my daughter for her cruelty, but because she had chosen to become someone worth respecting. The following month brought an opportunity that would test both of our growth in unexpected ways. Margaret Chen, my financial advisor, called with news about a commercial property that was about to go on the market. Elena, there's a hotel chain that's looking to sell one of their properties, the Grand Plaza, downtown. It's been struggling financially, but the location is prime and the building is solid. With the right management and renovation, it could be incredibly profitable. What kind of investment are we talking about? $15 million for the purchase, probably another $5 million for renovations. It would be your largest single investment, but the potential returns are extraordinary. That evening, I discussed the opportunity with Sophia over dinner. "A hotel?" she said, looking up from the legal brief she was reviewing. "That's interesting. You'd be buying the kind of business you've worked in for 30 years. With very different plans for how to run it."
What kind of plans? Fair wages for housekeeping staff, health insurance for all employees, profit-sharing programs, training and advancement opportunities, all the things I never had when I was cleaning rooms. Sophia smiled. You want to create the kind of workplace you wish you'd had. I want to create the kind of workplace where employees are treated with dignity, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. That sounds like a wonderful investment. Are you going to do it? I don't know. It would mean leaving my job at the current hotel and taking on enormous responsibilities. It would change our lives significantly. How so? I wouldn't be able to maintain my cover as a simple hotel housekeeper anymore. People would know I was a successful businesswoman. Our neighbors, your colleagues, everyone would see me differently. Sophia set down her papers and looked at me directly. Mom, are you worried about what people will think when they find out you're wealthy? I'm worried about losing the life we've built here. The simplicity, the genuine relationships, the focus on what really matters instead of what impresses other people. Money doesn't have to change who you are unless you let it. You taught me that. Did I? You spent years proving that character matters more than circumstances. Whether you're worth $8 or $8 million, you're still the woman who raised me with love and sacrifice. You're still someone who treats everyone with kindness, regardless of their position in life. Her words gave me the confidence to move forward with the hotel purchase. 6 months later, I was the owner of the Grand Plaza Hotel, implementing the employee-centered policies I had dreamed about during my years of cleaning rooms and making beds. The first person I hired was Mrs. Patterson, my former supervisor, as the general manager. The first policy I implemented was a living wage for all employees, including housekeeping staff. The first renovation I authorized was for the employee break room, creating a comfortable space where workers could rest and eat meals without feeling like they were intruding on guest areas. Sophia watched these changes with pride and understanding. You're not just running a business, she observed during one of her visits to the hotel. You're proving that success with character is possible. I'm proving that how you treat people matters more than how much profit you make. Although the profit doesn't hurt. No, it doesn't. But profit earned through exploitation feels different than profit earned through ethical practices. A year after purchasing the hotel, our lives had settled into a new rhythm. I spent my days managing a business that employed over 100 people, all of whom were paid fairly and treated with respect. Sophia continued excelling at her law firm while maintaining her commitment to pro bono work and community involvement. We still lived in the trailer, still shared meals and conversations, still found our greatest happiness in simple moments together.
The real test of our transformed relationship came when Sophia received an invitation that brought our journey full circle. Mom, Crawford Mitchell and Associates is having a reunion dinner. Richard Crawford wants to bring together everyone who worked at the firm before it dissolved. Are you planning to go? I think so. I'd like to see some of my former colleagues, and I'm curious about what everyone is doing now. Will you tell them about living here? About my real estate business? Sophia considered the question carefully. I'm going to tell them that I live with my mother, who is an amazing businesswoman, and the most important person in my life. If they want more details, they can ask. The reunion dinner was held at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place where Sophia had once entertained clients and impressed colleagues with her sophisticated lifestyle. She returned home that night with stories that revealed how much she had changed. James Mitchell asked where I was living now, assuming I'd found another luxury apartment. When I told him I live in a trailer park, he actually laughed out loud. How did that make you feel? Embarrassed for about 10 seconds. Then I remembered that he's the one who couldn't adapt to business challenges and ended up having to beg for a job at his father-in-law firm. I realized I didn't need his approval or respect. What did you tell him? I told him that I live in a home filled with love and honest conversation, which is more luxury than any overpriced apartment can provide. And how did he respond to that? He didn't know what to say. I don't think he'd ever heard anyone describe a trailer park as a choice rather than a failure. As we sat in our living room that night, sharing stories and laughing about the absurdities of social pretension, I realized that my elaborate plan had achieved something I hadn't expected. Not just teaching Sophia humility, but discovering my own capacity for forgiveness and growth. The woman who had called me trailer trash was gone, replaced by someone who understood that home isn't about impressing others. It's about being with people who love you for who you are. The mother who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme had also evolved, learning that the most meaningful victory isn't defeating your enemies, but helping the people you love become their best selves. Outside our window, the lights of the trailer park twinkled like stars, each one representing a family living their own version of the American dream. Simple dreams, maybe, but genuine ones. Dreams built on love and hard work, rather than status and acquisition. Sophia reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for becoming someone worth not giving up on. In the distance, we could see the city skyline where Sophia worked and where I owned a hotel that employed people with dignity and respect. But here, in our modest home, surrounded by honest neighbors, living authentic lives, we had found something more valuable than any real estate empire or corporate success. We had found our way back to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.